Imagine you and your friends decide to go camping in the middle of the desert. By sheer chance, one of your tents ends up right in the heart of a Jinn tribe. It sounds unbelievable, but that's exactly what happened to Salim and his friends. This story takes place in Saudi Arabia. Salim and two of his friends, who all have demanding and stressful jobs, decided to unwind during their vacation. On the first evening of their break, Salim called his friends and said, "I refuse to stay home tonight. There's no way I'm locking myself inside four walls." He told them, "We need to get out of here and camp somewhere quiet." Everyone agreed without hesitation. They prepared everything, tents, food, and supplies for a fire. They took the car and they headed to a popular camping area known for its peaceful vibes and scenic views. When they arrived, they noticed a large group already camping nearby. They set up their camp a bit farther away and started enjoying themselves, laughing and chatting. But one of Salim's friends seemed uneasy. Staring at the other group, he suddenly said, "I swear I can't handle seeing or hearing anyone tonight. No laughter, no noise. It's driving me crazy." Another friend suggested, "Let's move further away and camp somewhere completely isolated. That way, we'll have some peace and quiet." Everyone agreed. They quickly packed up, got back in the car, and drove deeper into the desert. The drive was lively, filled with jokes and conversations, but they kept moving from one spot to another, finding something wrong with each place. "This doesn't feel right," they'd say, and continue on. They drove farther and farther with the night creeping in around them. Finally, one of them pointed out, "This place is completely barren. There's absolutely nothing here." The only thing they could see in the darkness was a small, gentle sand dune in the distance. The spot was perfect for camping. Aside from the small sand dune, the area was completely flat, with smooth sand stretching as far as the eye could see. The clear skies and crisp air made it even better. There was no sign of people, just a few tire tracks in the sand. They stepped out of the car, instantly captivated by the peacefulness and beauty of the place. It was clean, quiet, and far from any signs of civilization. They switched on their lights and started setting up camp. The mood was lighthearted. Everyone was laughing and having a good time. But Salim couldn't shake off an unsettling feeling. It was as if someone or something was watching them. He didn't say anything, brushing it off as his imagination. "I'm just overthinking," he told himself, determined not to ruin the cheerful atmosphere. The mood shifted suddenly when Salim noticed his friend Elias frozen in place, staring into the distance with a shocked expression. Concerned, Salim called out, "Elias, what's wrong?" "What do you see?" Elias, still fixated on the sand dune, replied, "I see something. It's coming toward us." Alarmed, the group climbed to the top of the dune to get a better look. The darkness made it hard to see, but they strained their eyes. Gradually, the silhouette of a man walking toward them began to take shape. An old man was walking, limping heavily, and he was still far away from them. Salim said, "He looks like an old man. He doesn't seem like a bandit. Maybe he's just lost or saw the light and decided to come closer." His friend responded, "No problem. We won't approach him. Let's wait for him to come closer. If he does turn out to be a bandit, don't worry. I've got my gun with me for self-defense." They agreed and decided to keep working on setting up the camp. Since the man was still far off, they continued with their tasks. One started the fire, another pitched the tent. Not long after, the old man passed by them and greeted them, saying, "Peace be upon you." They replied, "And peace be upon you too." But they were baffled. How could an old, limping man cover such a long distance so quickly? They stared at him in confusion as he continued on his way, moving farther and farther away. Despite calling out to him, "Sir, do you need help? Are you lost?" he completely ignored them and disappeared into the darkness. They exchanged puzzled glances, half laughing but clearly uneasy. There was an unsettling tension in the air, and they didn't know what to make of it. Salim broke the silence and said, "Maybe that man has a campsite nearby with his family, and we just didn't notice it. Let's not overthink it." They decided to move on and finished setting up their tent. They gathered around the fire and started grilling meat for dinner. As they were chatting, Salim said, "That's when a strange wind passed through. Not strong, but it had this sharp, eerie sound like wheezing. It unsettled everyone. The sound was so unnerving that they started covering their ears, trying to block it out. Suddenly, a distant scream echoed through the desert. One of Salim's friends, the one they jokingly called the idiot, immediately said, "Did you guys hear that? It sounds like someone is in trouble. Maybe they're hurt. Let's take the car and check it out." Another friend, trying to stay calm, interrupted, "Don't rush. Sounds in the desert can be deceptive. You can't always head straight toward them. For all we know, it could be a family or even that man we saw earlier. We don't need to get caught up in anything. We came here to relax." The logic made sense, so they all agreed to let it go. They returned to their activities, grilling food, chatting, smoking shisha, and sipping tea and coffee while music played softly from a portable speaker. Everything seemed normal until one of them suddenly shouted, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. The group turned to see what had startled him. In the faint light, they saw a man approaching them. His clothes were tattered, and his face was partially covered with a scarf. As he got closer, he greeted them, saying, "Peace be upon you." They replied, "And peace be upon you too." The man then politely asked, "Would it be all right if I sat with you for a while?" They invited him to sit, saying, "Go ahead, make yourself comfortable." The man approached slowly and sat down, but as soon as he did, they caught a horrible stench coming from him. It was so overpowering that Salim and his friends were stunned into silence. They didn't even think to offer him coffee or anything else. They just stared, unsure of how to react. Breaking the silence, the man asked in a low voice, "Where are you all from?" Hesitating, they finally replied, "We're from the city center in Basra." The man nodded slowly, his eyes scanning them intently. Then he asked, "What brings you to this area?" Trying to remain calm, Salim replied, "This is God's land. We liked this spot and thought it'd be a good place to camp. That's all." The man's expression changed instantly, his gaze growing sharp and menacing. He locked eyes with Salim as if challenging him, then stood up and loomed over the group. In a cold, threatening tone, he said, "Since you came to this place of your own free will, be ready to face whatever happens." Without another word, he turned his back and walked off into the darkness. As he disappeared, one of Salim's friends, clearly angry, yelled after him, "Do whatever you want. We're not afraid." The man didn't respond, continuing to walk until he was swallowed by the night. The friend who had been scared from the beginning was now visibly shaken. He stared at the group and finally spoke. "Are you guys crazy? How could you talk to him like that? Couldn't you tell how strange he was?" One of them dismissed his fears, saying, "He was provoking us. What were we supposed to do? Just sit quietly. Don't worry, nothing's going to happen. There are 3 of us and we're armed. There's no need to panic." They tried to continue enjoying their night, but the man's cryptic warning lingered in the back of their minds. The group couldn't shake their unease and spent the rest of the evening debating whether to stay in the area or leave, wary of what might happen next. The only thing that kept them from leaving that area was the pitch-black darkness surrounding them. They knew that if they tried to move in those conditions, they would undoubtedly get lost. With no cell service and no internet, they had no way to navigate. Eventually, they decided to stay put, retreat to the tent, and wait for dawn to safely leave the area. Quickly, they entered the tent. One of them dashed to the car to retrieve the rifle they had brought for protection and brought it into the tent. They lay down in their sleeping bags, trying to ignore their unease and get some rest. But just as they closed their eyes, they heard the sharp, wheezing sound of the wind again. This time, it was accompanied by the sound of dogs barking, many dogs. The barking grew louder and closer, making it clear the animals had surrounded the tent. The sheer number of dogs made the group feel trapped. The barking became so relentless that one of them snapped. Overwhelmed by fear and frustration, he grabbed the rifle, his eyes filled with anger, and stormed out of the tent, determined to deal with the dogs. But as soon as he stepped into the darkness, there was a sudden, eerie silence. He stood still, scanning the darkness for any sign of the dogs. There were none, no movement, no sound, nothing. Just as he was starting to wonder if his mind was playing tricks on him, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard before. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely animal either. It sent chills down his spine, and he froze in place. He returned to the tent, trembling, and tried to explain what he had heard. But before he could finish, another, even more terrifying sound echoed through the night. It was a guttural, otherworldly noise that seemed to come from every direction at once. The group huddled together in fear, unable to comprehend what they were experiencing. They realized they were no longer alone in that place and might have crossed into a realm they didn't understand. Fear gripped them, and none of them dared to speak as the horrifying sounds continued to surround them. Each of them clutched their weapons tightly, but even that gave them little comfort. Sayad, the most frightened of the group, began to cry, his fear overwhelming him. Suddenly they heard footsteps approaching the tent, followed by the familiar voice of the strange man who had confronted them earlier.
"Leave this place. You're in the middle of our tribe's territory,"
he said ominously. The group sat in stunned silence, glancing at one another, not daring to make a sound. Salim motioned for them to stay quiet. The man continued, repeating his demand.
"Leave. Go far away. You must go."
Salim and his friends knew their only hope was to wait for daylight to escape the cursed area. Trapped in the oppressive darkness, they clung to what little courage they had left. Hours passed in silence, but just as they began to feel a sliver of relief, a new terror emerged. The faint sound of drums echoed through the still night, growing louder with every beat. Then came strange, chilling noises, unearthly voices, laughing, singing, and chanting. It sounded like preparations for war. The fire they had left burning outside the tent suddenly roared to life, blazing far beyond what seemed natural. The flames illuminated the area, revealing shadows of figures dancing around the fire. These weren't ordinary shadows. They were grotesque, distorted beings. Their bodies were humanoid, but twisted, with long goat-like legs, horns, and elongated torsos. Salim and his friends froze in sheer terror, their breaths shallow and their hearts pounding violently. It felt as though their chests would collapse under the weight of their fear. Sayad, unable to bear the sight, began to sob uncontrollably, pleading, "We have to get out of here. We need to leave now." Salim tried to reason with him. "It's pitch dark out there. We'll get lost, and there's no internet to guide us." But another friend, trembling, retorted, "I'd rather get lost than die here. Let's just run." A third voice chimed in, siding with Salim. "No, he's right. If we leave now, we'll never find our way. We need to think this through." But the group's fragile resolve crumbled as the shadows grew more menacing and the sounds of the drums and chants intensified. In a panicked frenzy, they grabbed their belongings and bolted for the car. As they approached, their worst fear materialized. The man who had threatened them earlier was standing behind the vehicle, watching them silently with a chilling smile. His presence sent a jolt of terror through their bodies. Without a second thought, they jumped into the car, leaving everything behind, and sped off into the night. The man didn't chase them. He just stood there, smiling as they fled. Inside the car, they blasted Quran recitations and repeatedly prayed for God's protection, gripping the steering wheel as they drove aimlessly through the desert. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they managed to escape the cursed area. Only then did they begin to breathe a little easier, though the horror of what they had witnessed would stay with them forever. At sunrise, Salim and his friends decided to pack up and leave as quickly as possible. They followed the faint tire tracks they had left behind the previous day, their nerves still frayed from the events of the night. When they finally reached their campsite, they jumped out of the car and hurriedly gathered their belongings, throwing everything together in a rush. Their eyes darted around nervously as they worked, expecting something, anything, to happen. But the silence of the desert remained unbroken. Nothing strange occurred, no shadows appeared, and no ominous sounds echoed in the distance. Once they were back in the car, speeding away from the eerie location, they started to breathe a little easier. Relief slowly replaced their fear, though their minds couldn't stop replaying the events of the night. The strange figures, the haunting sounds, and the burning fire were now burned into their memories. As they drove farther from the campsite, a single thought troubled them. What if they hadn't left? Would the Jinn have gone beyond just scaring them? Were they really in danger, or was it all just an elaborate illusion to force them out of the area? Salim and his friends agreed they would never forget that night. It was a lesson in respecting the unknown and a stark reminder of the mysteries that lurk in the world. For those hearing their story, it serves as a chilling tale and a warning. Some places are better left unexplored. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to like and share it. Your support makes all the difference.